Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are thrilled to have you here today for the inaugural session of our webinar series called Peer Review. So in this series, our goal is to bring you the perspective of experts who are truly sitting at the forefront of an industry transformation. By way of introduction, my name is Anita Modi, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Peer AI. Peer is a Gen AI platform for the life science space, and we're starting with regulatory medical writing. So as you all know, we're sitting in the middle of a massive industry transformation involving generative AI applications in life science. And one question that consistently comes to the forefront is how can we navigate the intricate and necessary web of legal, privacy, and quality considerations that inevitably come with adopting these innovative solutions? So to provide some clarity and perspective, we've invited 3 industry experts across these domains to share what they're seeing and give some practical advice for companies who are either building or buying generative AI solutions. Well, I am so glad to have the 3 of you here. So maybe to start off, we can look at really the last 18 months or so. I think in this time frame, we've had such an evolution in the generative AI technology stack. So my question for all of you is, what has changed in that time frame when you look at legal, privacy, and the quality landscape across the life science industry?
The first thing to keep in mind is that artificial intelligence is supposedly simulating the functioning of the human brain, the most complex structure in the known universe, and doing so using a combination of hardware circuitry and software and sophisticated mathematical techniques that's supposed to simulate the function of the human brain. But as we all know, it's not really able to do that. And there was a story in the Washington Post today which basically said that a 5-year-old exposed to much less data than your average large language model learns much faster and has much better reasoning. That said, the FDA and the EU regulatory authorities have worked together to produce documents such as the Artificial Intelligence Act and the FDA discussion papers that have come out regarding the use of artificial intelligence in the regulated arena. They all basically say the same thing, which is, number 1, human beings should always be in control. Number 2, you need to have transparency in all your processes and how you're developing artificial intelligence capabilities. Number 3, you need to have very good control over the quality of the data that you are using for either training the large language model or for use with the large language model to produce output. And number 4, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have done the right kind of risk assessments in each of these areas. And in order to do that, you actually have to have understanding of how the whole artificial intelligence operation works. And there is actually not a substitute for that. So my advice to companies is, first, get a hold of some of the basic technical expertise of how AI is working. And you need to stay in touch with what is happening with these regulatory agencies. Every day, there's a new development. Yesterday, the FDA announced they were going to have a series of meetings regarding the use of pharmacovigilance with artificial intelligence. They're inviting companies to come and join. You need to be part of the conversation to help to define how this is evolving.
Thanks, Neil. Laura, maybe we can hear from the legal perspective next.
Sure. Well, building on what Neil just said about paying attention to what regulatory agencies are saying, I would certainly second that. Even just today, the FDA released a collaborative document with Health Canada and the UK's MHRA about good machine learning practices. And this is building on a document that they released in 2021. And so we're seeing a lot of guide of not, I wouldn't say like discussion papers, white papers, frameworks for thinking about things. So we're hearing from, from the FDA primarily in our space about these are the things we're thinking about in developing regulations that have not yet been developed and guidances. And it's basically, so we're in this, and then on the state level, something like 25 different states have bills that they're looking at the regulation of AI, but a good chunk of those require studies. So before the bill itself requires further studies. So we're in this moment of sort of everybody agreeing on or trying to agree on basic principles, which are, I think, what Neil outlined is, so there needs to be a person in control. We need to have transparency, data quality needs to be invested in that is being attentive to issues of bias, in the data and being able to properly assess the risk. But we haven't arrived in most cases at actual regulation that would change how companies should operate today. So being aware that there's a lot of discussion, participating in that discussion, but not getting too locked into a really specific way of doing things, I think, because we don't know what the regulations are going to be. And I think that's challenging for industries, certainly, but at least there are these opportunities to participate in the discussion.
And you want to provide the privacy perspective?
Yeah, it really sort of piggybacks on what Neil and Laura have already been saying. But there has been, like Laura said, there's been a lot of activity at the state level in the US, but there's only been a few states that have passed AI-specific legislation to date: New York, Illinois, Maryland, and Colorado. And those are really focused on reducing bias in the employment setting. But a lot of the laws that are already on the books, the regulatory agencies, their lookout in terms of privacy and data protection are technology agnostic. But, the FTC is always interested in making sure practices are fair and transparent. And they have said, that they're doubling down on that related to AI. Congress is looking at, there's a lot of discussion at the federal level. And I think we'll see, in keeping with US sort of traditional practices, a focus on trying to support innovation. And like Neil talked about in the EU, obviously the AI Act, which is, making a big splash, and the EU, sort of similar to the GDPR, they have said, sort of interested in that being a global standard to help regulate AI globally. And certainly the breadth of it, it's looking like that will happen if you're interested at all in doing business in the EU. But I do want to say, and we'll get into this more, I'm sure, in more detail, but in the privacy setting, there's still a slew of privacy laws, and there's more and more state laws coming on the books, and certainly the GDPR and other global laws that regulate the use of personal information. And so whatever technology you're talking about, if you're processing personal information, it's still the fact that you need to comply with a variety of global privacy laws.
Appreciate that synthesis. And so I think all of you mentioned, some of the state level activity, federal guidance. So as this activity intensifies, right, and is starting to evolve, both obviously in the US, but with international bodies as well, issuing guidelines, issuing these frameworks, where do you see this going? What can we expect in, say, the next 3 years, next few years across legal, quality, and privacy as well? Maybe Laura, I'll ask you to kick it off this time.
So what we're hearing as the primary concerns on the state level, on the federal level, and then ex-US as well, are not new concepts. I mean, they're the things that we've kind of been talking about. And I think that it seems to be headed in the direction, like so many other technological advances, to be able to where users of this, what companies utilizing AI or offering AI products, are going to need to be able to show their work. So that speaks to the issue of explainability. And Neil, touched on the topic of being able to do a risk assessment. We're going to have, I think we'll see, what does an actual risk assessment look like? What are the questions that a company needs to be able to answer for itself and to be able to articulate externally? So I think we're going to have more clarity as to the basic principles. Nothing new or exciting, but we're going to have more clarity as to nuts and bolts. How do you demonstrate your compliance with these principles? And I think we'll also see, depending on how involved industry gets, industry shapes regulation, not just in terms of its feedback to the FDA and the FTC, but in terms of how it then enacts whatever guidance comes out. And so I think we'll just have more examples to work from. And I'm hopeful that a certain set of best practices actually emerges that all companies can use, and that we get to sort of a basic basic standards around the use of AI and how we do risk assessments and how we explain what we're doing externally and so on, so that neither massive companies nor tiny companies are overly privileged or disadvantaged, but we're kind of all working from the same playbook.
Yeah, and I remember you were talking to us about how even contracts might evolve and language around that. I don't know if you want to share more.
Yeah, but I think we're seeing, in terms of interactions or contracts between companies, where both sides are utilizing AI or just one side is, there's some, we haven't settled on like the standard contractual clauses yet, to borrow a term. So I think we'll start to see, in the same way that we'll have hopefully best practices emerge, we'll have clear contract language where people know what they're referring to, and we can speak more fluently in contracts, more fluently and concisely. And then I think also, on the issue of sort of risk assessment and ongoing assessment, I would expect to see some changes to audit language around frequency and what audits entail to ensure compliance with it, whether they're regulations or best practices. I think that's a change I'd expect to see in contracts.
Yeah. Neil, do you want to provide the quality perspective?
To build on what Laura said, contractual language will have to be much better defined. And it'll have to be defined based on the risk assessments of what exactly a company is taking responsibility for. If a company, for example, is not building its own LLM, large language model, and is simply leveraging an existing LLM, but using, say, retrieval augmented generation together with prompt engineering to use it, then that company's risk assessment is going to look very different from a company that has decided that it's going to build its own large language model in order to make sure it controls the quality of the data used for training it, so that there are no hallucinations. These are crucial business decisions that companies will have to make as to what level of responsibility you take on, and then the contractual language that that company then establishes with its partners would have to reflect that. Who exactly is responsible for what risks? And in order to have something solid to hang on to, obviously, the government agencies will need to be issuing more definitive regulations. Now, I should warn you that we all live under this regulation called 21 CFR Part 11, okay, which came out in 1997. But the notice of proposed rulemaking, that came out in 1992. It became a regulation in 1997, and then the guidance around it was not fixed until August of 2003. All this was happening because the government took a very collaborative approach with companies. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to take 5 years. What I'm saying is that this is going to take hard work on the part of the government agencies as well as private industry. Industry cannot sit back and wait for the government to say this is how it should be done. Industry must play a very active role. And when I say industry, I mean everybody, the technologists, the legal experts like Laura, the privacy experts like Jen, the quality experts such as myself. We are all going to have to pitch in and play a role in making sure that the regulations and the guidances that govern the use of AI, that they actually reflect the reality that we're working with and that they're actually workable. So, as I said before, I would encourage every company out there, get involved, learn. Do not wait for the government to issue a bunch of regulations and guidelines. Do your part in defining the rules. And as Laura pointed out, you need to be able to do the right risk assessments in the different areas. And as I had said before, that means you actually need to know how it works, how the technology is actually working. And unfortunately, the technology is evolving. That's what makes this so difficult, because of the very rapid evolution of something that is much more complex than anything we've dealt with before.
Right.
I just wanted to add one thing. When Neil's talking about getting involved, for those who aren't familiar with this, you can get, the FDA issues draft guidances. It invites comment. There's opportunities to submit comment. There's also public workshops, which are lately virtual as well as in person. So there are actual real opportunities to participate. And of course, there's probably industry groups as well that are voicing their concerns. So if you basically, I'll find the link to it and post it, but you can get on the FDA's email list for when they announce these kinds of things and start showing up.
And what I should also add is, when I listen to, say, FDA officials speaking and the webinars that they've already had, it is pretty obvious to me that they know exactly what they are doing. They've been down this road before with other technology developments. They are following a very professional and well thought out approach as to how they're going to handle the construction of the regulations and how they're going to integrate industry input into this. So I think that is the bright spot that I see in this. The tough part is it's so difficult to understand what's going on a daily basis. You know, as I was telling this panel, there was a senator from Louisiana, Senator Kennedy, who was asked, Senator, does Congress understand artificial intelligence? And his response was, the short answer is no. The long answer is hell no. So it's important that the right experts get involved.
Yeah. Just to join the conversation a little bit. This is like really for the folks attending. We talked yesterday, and just like this is such a meaty, fascinating area. I think that we could all keep talking about it forever. You know, I just want to add from a privacy perspective, like another reason, as we're encouraging you to add your voice is, I'm sure the data is pretty much everything. And if laws get passed that are really restrictive because the regulators are fearful, kind of responding to public fears, when laws get passed that are too restrictive, it can be very difficult for companies to use data in a way that, is still innovative and helpful. I'm thinking like the Washington My Health, My Data Act that everyone I'm sure is, going through a lot of hoops to understand and try to comply with. Another reason I think companies should really be involved here is that, like we're saying, obviously AI is complex, but I think that, there's a lot of the fear, and the companies that really lean into their use of AI and being transparent, really understanding your use, and again, making it known to the end user, making it known to your clients, your business partners, that you're a good data steward. I think it's going to be a competitive advantage. I mean, I think certainly it's the right thing to do, but I also think companies, that are a trustworthy partner, again, will probably be better positioned to win business. And just in terms of going back to the question about where things are headed, certainly we're going to see more regulation. And I think there's just going to be, again, because of public fears and regulators tend to respond to that, I think there's just going to be more and more expectations on developers and deployers of AI to be transparent in their data acquisition, the models that they're using, how that data is being trained, who has access to it. And I think that companies that maybe double down on the use of privacy enhancing technology, some of these things are certainly not new, but things like federated learning, where the data can stay with the client, with the institution, but you're sharing the learning model, differential privacy, edge computing, again, keeping the processing close to the device, things that companies implement that are supportive of privacy, but will allow you to exploit in a good way the data in a more robust way. And I think we'll probably see more focus on that, again, as these regulations come out that, are just, again, requiring a higher standard in terms of data use.
I think we're already sort of going here in the conversation, but I want to get really tactical, right? I want to jump into some advice that you have for folks who are joining in. I think I hear a message loud and clear: get involved, and that can look, look like a lot of different things. I guess, what can companies do, right? Especially a lot of the companies building this space are startups right now, but you have a lot of, companies obviously evaluating the use of Gen AI, partnering, building, buying tools as well. What should they really be thinking about? And do you have any practical guidance? Jen, I'll let you start because I think you're already kind of going there on the privacy side.
Yeah, awesome. I think what all three of us are saying is, again, there's some newness around AI, but it's not, there's sort of like, we don't want it to be seen as AI exceptionalism and that a company has to turn itself upside down to comply. I mean, there's still the fundamental practices around quality, legal, and privacy compliance that cut across technology. And so I would say, look at your privacy program and the privacy practices that you have in place. And again, the privacy laws are technology agnostic. And so how is your program now? Are you adhering to privacy best practices that are baked into most of these laws, and certainly the GDPR, things around data minimization, only using the data that you need to accomplish your task? Are you transparent in your use of data? Are you able to honor data subject rights? That's obviously huge with the GDPR. If someone in particular wants to delete their data, would you be able to do that? Unless you have a lawful reason to not honor that request, you would need to be able to do that. And so that goes back to just sort of maintaining a good privacy program of being able to understand how the data flows throughout your company, throughout your AI system, so you can track it. And if you receive requests, can you honor it? And I think, the idea of privacy by design, that's central, that you're thinking about privacy throughout your use of AI. And you're, like everyone has said, doing risk assessments, and certainly in the privacy realm, that would be a data protection impact assessment, which would really, it's a really useful tool. It's not just something, I have to dust it off and do it, but it's a way for you to really understand, what data am I using? What protections do I have in place? How could I respond to data subject requests? And to have appropriate documentation if regulators ever ask, that you're being a good partner here.
Thanks, Jen. Laura, do you want to jump in with the legal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I kind of want to touch on Trevor's question too about because I think it ties in about in the chat. There's a question about any thoughts on how small startup companies can best leverage partnerships, agreements, BAs, et cetera, with larger companies to build confidence in AI solution implementations in the clinical space. And so this is real, practical, like how do we do this? And I work with a lot of smaller companies. And so I love thinking about how can smaller companies work with bigger companies in a way that, doesn't set up a David and Goliath situation that doesn't turn out like it does in the Bible. So I think that, there's a couple things that we've seen. One is that, smaller companies or companies who are providing services to larger companies often have to, complete an RFP, a request for proposal. And I think we're going to start to see more refined questions and detailed questions in those specific to AI. And some of them will be well phrased and some of them will not. But I think using that as a starting point for, being prepared for, like, what are you going to need to be able to say and explain just to the procurement department? Never forget procurement. They're often the most important people that you'll deal with. And so, and to use those, though, as a discussion, as opening up a discussion. And so if you don't hit the nail on the head with your response, invite a conversation to say, well, what are you looking for? I want to really make sure I understand this question, or that we're really speaking to all your concerns, and then use what you get back to prepare, for the next one. I think also doing things like proofs of concept or pilot programs, with larger customers, smaller companies, offering to do those kinds of proof of concepts or pilot programs, to really show, show don't tell, but show, how their solution works, how it's compliant, how it's supportive of the larger company's compliance. So I think that, practically speaking, using the documents that are generated by bigger companies to see what they're caring about, and then doing these kind of practice runs with them is another way to do it. And if you can get them to pay for it, even better. I call that selling tickets to the rehearsal. And if you can do it, I absolutely commend you. Good salespeople can do it. I love seeing it.
If I can just say one thing, just tied, if the question is also about, in terms of being a startup and trying to contract with some of the, the bigger companies providing the models, I have seen that those contracts are actually, at least with some of these big players, depending on who you partner with, they are willing to be, even on their template language, in terms of ownership of data, how they've trained the model, things around retention, that's certainly like having zero retention on that side and it not being used to train their model. There are certain things that I think even these big companies are willing to entertain because they want the business. And also they know these are the same questions that everybody is interested in, especially when you're talking about in the life sciences, very sensitive data.
Thanks, Jen. That's a great point. Neil, do you want to give, I know you talked a little bit about risk assessments. What other practical advice do you have for companies?
Okay. For any company, whether you're large or small, the very foundation of all this is to have a very solid quality management system in place. If you don't have that in place already, then it's very difficult to take on the risks of something new, such as AI. So quality management system in terms of just policies, procedures, training, and of course, the systems that make it possible. There's all kinds of electronic quality management systems in place. The other thing is to make sure that you have proper risk assessment processes built into your quality management system, and that those risk assessment processes are carried out uniformly across different areas. So how you evaluate risk, how you evaluate the severity of a risk, that has to be uniform across the organization. And then that has to filter into how you do things such as validation of systems, assessment of vendors, design of contracts, and making sure that you have properly written the contracts with your vendors, that you have properly audited vendors from whom you're getting services, whether they're hosting, whether they're providing the artificial intelligence capabilities, and you're just using it. All those things need to be very properly defined. And then you have to be able to demonstrate with solid, hard-level compliant documentation that you have actually executed on your entire quality management system, all the deliverables required by the different processes, and that you can just pull them up in case of inspection, and that you have done all these things transparently, that you are doing things according to predetermined objective criteria, that you are not just improvising on the fly as challenges come up. You have to think through what might happen, what risks may happen, how are you going to address those risks, how are you going to determine exactly what, for example, what is the level of testing that's required for a particular requirement based on its risk analysis. Things that people have done before, but now it becomes doubly important. So that is basically the issue. The importance of quality management system just becomes more and more and more important. So I would say focus on that first. And then, as the other panelists were saying, make sure you stay on top of what's happening with the different regulations. But I would say a very important thing that every company needs to do is to delineate its responsibilities and therefore its risk. Have it spelled out very clearly, procedurally, contractually, and at the policy level. Exactly what is it that you're doing with this technology? What are the risks that you are taking on? And how are you addressing those risks? Who's responsible for what? And what are the things that you are not responsible for?
Yeah, that's great advice. And what I hear kind of at the base of it is making sure this is just really incorporated into your company, right? Privacy by design, quality by design, and taking a lot of the principles, but the high level principles are not changing. It's just really thinking about additional transparency, additional documentation, and continuous evaluation, of your risk, of your processes. So thank you for that. And thank you for the perspective. And thank you for folks who joined for our first series of peer review. We'll be scheduling more over the coming months. Feedback is welcome, but thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.